Hi, ADBros here for cgmasters.net. Here we have another bonus tutorial from the Hard Surface Modeling course. We've already had a chapter from Gleb on creativeshrimp.com about previewing your modeling cycles. This one we managed to bundle with the course on the release date, and I have to take a second to say thanks so much to everyone who supported us. It's seriously been crazy the amount of support and interest we've seen for this project. We even managed to give the Blender Market servers a really good stress test. One of my favourite moments, I think, was when Captain Disillusion posted a suggestion that we may actually just be one person pretending to be two, and that if we really wanted to convince anyone that we were actually two different people, then maybe we should try to make it easier to tell us apart. Captain Disillusion then posted an image to help illustrate a potential solution. I actually enthusiastically showed this image to my kids, and my 6-year-old daughter in particular hated it. Oh well, so anyway, Gleb drinks coffee and I drink green tea. I mean, we literally couldn't be more different. Anyway, so in this bonus video, we wanted to look at something that often gets overlooked when considering ways to speed up your modeling workflow, and that's with selection. Of course, before we edit something, we have to know how to select it. And so here we have 20 selection tips for you. But first, we want to make sure everyone watching has a good grounding with the essentials. So let's get into it. When talking about Blender and selection, we've got to start at the fundamentals. Since selection in the first place, it's done with the right mouse button. I know that confuses a lot of people. We can actually change it in the user preferences if you really want to. Under the input tab, we've got this select with left or right mouse button option. I know Gleb's coming from 3ds Max with its left mouse select. Same with me, I studied on 3ds Max, and back in the day I used Maya on the Lego games, also with its left mouse select. But we both just stick with Blender's defaults these days. I don't think it was actually very difficult to transition really, once you stick with it anyway. I think the general idea over it, by the way, is if we put our gizmo on, you can see we have the arrows emitting from the object that we have selected here, and we would left click on these. But if we line this up, say with another object, let's grab this one actually. So we have this larger plate selected. Let's say I wanted to select this piece right here instead. If I was to left click this, Blender might think I want to actually move this piece along the y-axis. But if I right click in that position instead, we've selected this object. Personally, I think the unfortunate thing about that is I rarely use the gizmos anyway, so we just tend to switch them off, or you can toggle them off with Control Space. But Blender is super customizable, as you'll see in those user preferences. So more fundamentals, of course, is that this has an orange outline when it's selected. Whatever object we have selected has this orange outline, or maybe if it's in a group, it'll have a green outline. You can kind of see what the deal is if we press Z to toggle the wireframes there. Certain objects have different colored wireframes under different conditions, like with physics and so on, but you can see we kind of get this highlighted color over something that we have selected. If we have more than one object selected, we can shift select this and this. You can see that this one has a slightly lighter orange than this one in the background here. Let's just toggle the wireframe there and you can see what I mean. And Z to toggle that back. So N to toggle our properties sidebar. Here's our outline selected option in the display. We can actually just turn that off altogether if we wanted to. Some more fundamentals. If I go shift space to bring back the full screen here with our properties window down here, and we've also got our outliner. We can hit the full stop on the numpad to be able to zoom into whatever object that we have selected. We can also do that in the 3D view. So we can come through here and start selecting in the outliner as well. I'm actually going to make that more obvious by pressing Z and just zooming it out a bit, and you can see which pieces that we have selected. This is pretty handy stuff because we can also set some conditions as to what we want to see up here, and then also just do some kind of text search. So I'm going to type in circle there, for example, and there's these 3 objects called circle, and this is clearly not a very well organized scene just at the moment. We haven't gone through and renamed everything. Another core technique to know about is if we zoom into these legs down here, see this object at the back, that's called cylinder.023. Well, let's say we had a piece in here selected and we were working at this part. If we wanted to select that part in the background, we don't have to move the camera if we didn't want to. If we Alt and right select, this is our select menu of everything that was under the cursor at the time, and it was the cylinder.023. If we click on that, you can see it's that back leg that gets selected again. Just opening up our user preferences again, you can see under the System tab, we have a selection section here as well, and this OpenGL depth picking.
I've just got this set to automatic. But if you do happen to have some difficulties selecting many objects at once, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's where the settings are, which you might want to have a little try around different options to see if your viewport will speed up to be able to select things there. In particular, many objects at once. All right, so in the outliner, as we can filter out names, as we saw with the circle, we can also do the same kind of idea just down in our select menu. At the top here in object mode, we have select pattern. We can set it to be case sensitive as well. I'll keep that asterisk there as a wildcard. Type in circle and then asterisk for anything that comes after that. So anything with the word circle in it, basically. Hit enter and it goes through and finds any objects that fit that criteria. You can see we've got 3 objects selected, which if we take a look in here again, seems to confirm that. All right, let's delete that and keep things clean. When we enter into edit mode on an object, we can see our vertex, edge and face selections there. We can switch what kind of selection we're in by just clicking on the icons here. We can hold shift and do multiple ones at once. So now we could just select a vertex there if we wanted to, but we can shift select that face as well. A shortcut to be able to swap between the various selection modes is Control Tab. I tend to do this quite a lot, and then we can switch to edge select mode, for example. What I love about Blender is the way that it remembers what's been selected. So if I select that edge and then tab out into object mode and then select this and then tab into edit mode, select this one maybe, tab back into this one, you can see that that edge has been remembered. It's nice to be remembered. If I go Control Tab and switch over to Vertex Selection mode, it converts that to the corresponding vertices. If I just had one vertex selected though, and Control Tab switched over to Edge Select mode, we would lose it, and then we'd go back to Vertex Select mode and we've lost it. But if I select that vertex and go Control Tab and then Control click on face, it doesn't lose it. It takes that vertex and any faces connected with it, it will just assume, oh, okay, well, let's add these to the selection instead of just ignoring it altogether then. As you can see, I've just been clicking on a face to select it. You can hold Shift to be able to add to that selection. Other types of selections we might want to do is B for the border select. Once we press B, we now go to left select. So we go left and click across the whole thing there to select everything. A to deselect and A to toggle the selection of all. We've got C to enter into a paint select. We can use our middle mouse wheel to scroll up and down the size of the brush and start to left click and paint selection. Unfortunately with this tool at the moment, you can't change the view once you enter that tool. Right click to cancel that tool. We can also use our Lasso Select, so we can control and left click around a selection and it will add it to it, which is quite a cool way to select things if you're really used to that left select in a lot of cases. Very quick and easy to just control and left click over a selection that you want and it'll just keep on adding it to the selection. If you want to remove from the selection, you can Control Shift click around a part. If you're using the B key for the box selection, once we're into that tool, we can middle click and drag across a portion to deselect it. With our circle tool here, the circle paint tool, we can middle click and paint around a selection to remove it. All right, let's talk about the limited selection. So if I press B for the border tool and then left click and drag across this portion here, we have this option enabled in the header bar, which is limit selection to visible. So if we take a look around here, you'll be able to see there's quite a few parts here that didn't get selected. If I press A to deselect them, and then again, maybe from here, I'll press B and border select across all this stuff. You can see back here, there's a whole area of faces that didn't get picked up. Now, if we really did want to select everything, we can make that really easy on ourselves by just toggling the wireframe. When in wireframe, you can see that option completely goes away. And now when you border select across an area, you're going to pick up the entire selection. I find that easier just toggling the wireframe with the Z key than changing a setting in the 3D bar, but I do want to point that out anyway. So if we uncheck that, you can see we can actually see through this piece now, the faces that are on the side beyond this piece. And we can now press B and border select across those, no problem. I'm going to re-enable that though. To select an edge loop, we can go Alt and right click on it. To add to that, we can go Shift and Alt right click to get more edge loops. And then Shift Alt right click on it again to remove it from the selection. We can also select a loop either in the select menu. We have a select edge loops here. Click on that. Again, Shift Alt right click on it again to deselect it, or we could select it and go Control E for our edges menu, and then we'll find at the bottom there we also have edge loops. We also have in that menu edge rings, which gets you parallel edges selection there, and then we've also got the same option in there as well. So I'm Control Alt right clicking on that to get an edge ring, and if we want to add to the selection, we can hold Shift and Control Alt right click. Just close the properties sidebar so the key presses are a little bit more obvious there. With nothing selected, we could just press L and that will select everything that happened to be under the cursor. So for example, if I had some floating geometry over here, so I'll just duplicate that and then press A to deselect it. If I press L over this stuff, you can see that it didn't get picked up. If I press L over it now, it gets added to the selection. And going in reverse order there, we can just press L with our cursor over that one. It'll only select the connected faces, which I want to do because I want to delete that guy now with X. Similar kind of selection is by selecting a face and going Control L. That doesn't care where your cursor is at that moment. It's just going to select the link faces to what we had selected. One of the selection menus is really powerful, and that's the Select Similar menu, the Shift G shortcut here. For example, if we select this face and maybe we wanted all the ones roughly pointing in that same direction, we could go Shift G and then we've got coplanar. If we press F6 to get the tools a little bit closer to the cursor here, we can turn this value down. Press Z to toggle the wireframe, and now we've just got those faces facing this way. In a similar kind of way, if I select this one and go Shift G, and we've got the normal, so again all the faces more or less facing that same direction. Another cool one is if we select this one, we want just all the very small faces that we've got, we can go Shift G area, and again F6. Let's take this really low, 0.0001 for example. It rounds it down to 0, but it's there. If we click into it, you can still see the 1. And if I press Z to toggle the wireframe, you can see all the smallish faces that got selected there. This menu is really cool because it also depends on context. So this is giving us a whole load of face-related similar options. If I Control Tab over to Edge Select and go Shift G, you can see now we've got all these kinds of options. So for example, if I wanted to get all the creased edges, that's what these pink outlines are, we could go Shift G and just select similar creased edges, and now we've got them all. Some pretty handy ones can also be the length, although maybe not so much in this particular object. So this menu will show different options depending on which selection mode that we're in, and that just doesn't include this edit mode. It also means that it's going to show us something different if we're in object mode. So I'll switch out of that and again go Shift G, and we can see all the various different options that we can do there. In a similar kind of way to the Select Similar menu, we can tab into an object which has got some larger flat faces and select this one for example, and let's come down to our select menu. We have linked flat faces, Shift Control Alt and F. So let's go Shift Control Alt and F, and you can see there we've got all the faces that are facing that same kind of side, bit like the coplanar option. If I go F6 to bring up that tools options, you can see we can change our sharpness value here, which is just including or decreasing the sensitivity of that, what we're willing to accept as being flat. Another really useful selection tool is the Select Shortest Path option. So for example, if I was to Alt right click on this edge loop, it's going to terminate at this pole since it won't know which direction to head down next. A way around that is to select this edge and hold Control and select this one. And let's press F6. You can see this is our shortest path tool. That's giving us some extra selection options there, but that usually works straight out of the box for what we want. It should work in Vertex Select mode as well. So let's select this one and Control select this one. And again, it selected everything in between. Another cool selection tip, if we have this face selected, we can hold Control and click here for the shortest path again, even in face select mode, so we can select face loops that way. We can also select a whole span of faces. If I was to Control click on this one, it's just going to get a single path. But if I take this and Control Shift click on it, it knows I want the complete span of that 4x4 grid there. The next selection tool I think it's very good to know about is the Select More or Less, and that is the Control Numpad plus and minus keys. So we can go Control plus with this particular face selected, and it's just going to keep on growing. Control minus on the numpad to shrink that into oblivion. For this one, I'm going to go Shift A and add in a mesh plane, which is over here, and you can see it's kind of rounded out at the edges. Let's say this object had a lot more geometry to it, so let's subdivide it a few times. You can still see that it rounds out at the very corners though, and so a useful thing to be able to do is to select this one. We could press Control L to just select what's linked to that face, and then we can go Control E and we can convert that to a boundary loop. Now you can see that we've just got the edges that go around that selection. From there we can go Shift E and 1, and that gives a crease to all of those edges and those sharpens those corners in for us. So if I undo that with Control Z a couple of times, you can also see we can find that tool in our select menu just at the top there. Let's say we had a little cylindrical piece like this. I could Alt right select on this face loop around the edge here. If we wanted to add in some uniform detail, we can come down to our select menu and check a deselect. Let's press F6 and you can see we've got every second selection, or we can say every third or fourth. And now with that we can press I to inset, and then Alt-E and extrude back along vertex normals, for example. Maybe switch over to our individual origins, press S to scale down, and now we've got a little detail which runs around the whole thing there. For this next tool, let's go Shift Space, and I'm just going to switch on our Auto Smooths, and around 22.5 is giving us some nice auto sharp angles there. I'm just going to stick with that. Then I'm going to tab into Edit Mode, couple of edge rings with Control R, Alt select this middle one and dissolve it. Control Tab to switch to Face Select, Alt select this one, E to extrude up a little bit of rim detail here. And let's go down to our Select Random, and let's press F6, and you can see that has selected randomly 50% of our mesh. This can be pretty useful for little greebling details, especially if you're not looking for something as uniform as our checker deselect. I'll Alt right click to get this face loop, and then again go to the tool, select random, and instead of it being select, I'm going to say deselect. And then we can play with the seed until we get something we like the look of, or we can just tweak the slider a little bit here, and then I'm just going to leave it around there, and then just press E to extrude it up a little bit, S maybe to scale all those guys in. That might work well since we're on that individual origins, just to give it another little bit of character. So our random select is especially good for anything kind of slightly organic or chaotic. Another selection tip is that we can use vertex groups to save selections. So for example, we've got those top faces selected there from that operation. We can come over to our vertex groups, click on the plus icon, and assign all those faces there. And let's just rename that as top. I click another one and name this side. And then let's say we wanted to select all of these guys, and then we can assign those to the side. And then let's press A to deselect everything. And now in wireframe, just to make it really clear, I'll select that top one and then click select. And then we can see on this bottom one, if we click select, it selects that vertex group that we have there. And clearly also useful for deselection. Say we wanted to do something quickly to this, but not to any of those vertices to do with that bottom face loop that we had. We have that side vertex group highlighted in blue there, so we can just hit the deselect button. Next, let's give this thing a bevel modifier, and by default it's not got a limit method, so it's going to bevel every single edge on this. Setting it to angle is pretty useful, but sometimes for some reason we didn't want any of these edges up here to be beveled, and we don't want to have to go through and select everything to manually set it to weight. Well, this is set to an angle method of 30, and so what we can do is set that to weight, which turns off all the beveling on that now. None of our edges have any weight value. But what we could just simply do is just go to select sharp edges. Let's go F6. The sharpness by default is set to 30. And now in our properties sidebar with the N key, we can just set our mean bevel weight all the way up. So now the tool should be very similar whether we set it to angle or weight. But now we can go through and let's say we didn't want these edges for whatever reason to be included. Let's get the whole ring around there actually. Control Alt and select. We could just set those down to 0 to cancel those out. Yeah, we still maintain all that bevel for those sharp edges up there. And remember, it's still easy to get these because we could just select one of these, Shift G, and then select similar bevel. And we very quickly got that selection for which to be able to tweak the weighting option there. Now we're all a little bit clumsy sometimes. So for example, with this edge, I could press E by accident and then kind of go, oops, a daisy. Now I've just done a terrible thing there, which is just created an extra face, extruded underneath the geometry there, some non-manifold geometry, some physically implausible stuff there, and that gets worse, much worse, if we were to put a subdivision surface modifier on in that area. So I'm going to switch that off, save the eyes. So let's say we were unaware that we'd made that, but we knew there were a whole bunch of issues with our mesh that really needed cleaning up. We have got a bit of a selection set, which is really good for cleanup stuff, which is the select all by trait. And at the top there is non-manifold. And as soon as we select that, there we go, we can now delete that face. Let's say we were patting ourselves on the back for how brilliantly we kept all this as quads. Well, we could use that same menu again, select all by trait, and let's say select faces by sides, F6 to take a look at this. Are there any n-gons? Well, any faces above 4 sides, let's put that to greater than, and the answer is yes, there's 2 of them. Z to toggle the wireframe, and it's really easy to see where those are. It's just the cylinder caps basically. In a similar kind of way, there is an add-on which can help us. So Control Alt and U, let's take a look at the add-ons. In particular, there's one called the 3D Print Toolbox. I'm going to enable that. And then in our tool shelf, which is where it'll show up, we have a 3D printing tab with a whole bunch of options here, mostly for checking our mesh is ready for 3D printing. There is one thing that we might find handy on this though, which is if we take this face and press RY90, and so that we have this face coming out of it. If for some reason we wanted to keep track of these sorts of faces, well, we can check for intersections, and apparently we have 3 intersecting faces, and there they are, there's the culprits. And of course, with the power of Blender, we can always left click and drag at the top here just to pull this down and then swap this over to a Python console. And we can always script our way out of a complicated selection issue. So for example, we could try something like, for every object in the bpy.context.scene.objects, we can do something. So for example, let's print all the objects in the scene, and there's quite a lot of them. So anyway, I'm going to hit the up arrow a couple of times to get that thing back. And let's say if the object's location on the Z value is greater than, let's see, I have this piece selected here. This is 0.25. So let's say 0.25. Then we'll do something else. Let's select it. So we'll go object select is equal to true. And now let's take a look at what we've got. And basically everything above that piece just got selected. So I realize this isn't a Python course or anything, and I'm far from being some kind of Python wizard, but hopefully that little snippet of code there whets the appetite and maybe pushes the intrigue on that whole thing as to what could be done there. So with Python, your selection options become practically limitless. And if you do want to get into some more Python, you can't go wrong with the artist's introduction to it from Sieber and Stuvell at the Blender Institute. And having said that, that's going to wrap up our selection tips. There's really even more that can be done with selection with Blender, but we think those are some of the best ones to know about for some good old hard surface modeling. So once again, many thanks for joining us on this hard surface modeling course. It's been amazing seeing the things people have been sharing with us about it. Gleb has already mentioned that it's changed our lives, and I'd like to echo that sentiment again here. It has totally freed us up in even more ways to deliver what we hope you'll agree will be much more good stuff. So please stay tuned, and thanks again.